This is Block 10, the 60s, Part 4, in From the Shadows, with the section Hispanic Americans. As many of you might know, people of Spanish descent, Hispanic descent, have lived in what is the United States since the earliest days of the nation. The annexation of Texas in 1845 sped up this process. And the end of the Mexican War in 1848 added a huge Hispanic population. Not a huge, I'm sorry. A large Hispanic population to the United States. To the point where when New Mexico became a state in the late 1800s, many of New Mexico's earliest senators and governors were Hispanics, Mexican Americans, people of Mexican descent. So the American Hispanic population was kind of focused in Texas and the Southwest for a long time. In the 1940s, Puerto Ricans who were American citizens began arriving in New York, and they formed the first large Spanish-speaking minority group in New York City. Mexicans, back to the Southwest, had a long history of working in the farms of California and the Southwest, and as we have seen, that led to a degree of tension during World War II, the Zoot Suit riots, and other things like that. Thousands upon thousands of Cubans fled Cuba when Castro came to power in the early 1960s. Those were kind of drops in the proverbial bucket, that by 1965, people of Hispanic descent were less than 1% of the American population, and that's with Puerto Rican and Cuban and Mexicans living within the American borders. The Immigration Act of 1965, which we have talked about in Block 9, opened up the United States to mass Hispanic immigration. And over the past 55 years, or excuse me, over the past 50 years, the amount of Spanish-speaking people in the United States, Hispanic Americans, Latinos, whatever you want to call them, have increased by leaps and bounds inside the United States. In the year 2003, Hispanics became America's largest minority group. And as you can tell from the chart here, where we are here is somewhere in between 2010 and 2015, and the numbers of Hispanics are only supposed to rise in the next 40 years. That Hispanics have a higher birth rate in the United States than native-born Americans, white or black, and you're going to start to see more and more Hispanics in more and more states. The numbers obviously do not tell the entire story. The amount of Hispanics living in the United States has fundamentally changed the politics, society, economics, and culture of the entire United States, but especially those states in which Hispanics are concentrated. California, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Florida, New York, and New Jersey. More than others, although every state almost has a growing Hispanic population. In terms of the 1960s, Hispanic Americans really kind of started to make their numbers count in terms of political clout with a union organizer by the name of Cesar Chavez. Chavez was of Mexican descent, and what he did was he took all of those agricultural farm workers in the Southwest who were working for very little money a day, very long, very difficult hours, who dealt with, a serious language barrier between themselves and the Americans that they worked for. And what this charismatic and soft-spoken individual did was he unionized the Mexican agricultural workers of the Southwest. Now belonging to a union, these workers got higher wages, more benefits, less discrimination, and it made the United States, almost most importantly, it made the United States an attractive place for more and more people of Mexican birth to come to the United States. With the liberalized immigration laws, and with the possibility for economic advancement, and of course, those are pull factors, and there's always push factors. The endemic corruption and violence in the Mexican government made a whole heck of a lot of Mexicans move to the United States, both legally and, as we all know, illegally. Where they have in very, to a very large extent, lived out the story of American immigration. In terms of degrees of discrimination, degrees of assimilation, degrees of economic success, degrees of economic failure, degrees of political power, etc., etc., etc. All of these things have been a part of the Hispanic experience in the United States, and they've also been a part of the experience of every immigrant group that has come to the United States. The radicalism of the 1960s did not leave Hispanic Americans behind. Radical groups like La Raza advocate against learning English. They advocate for the states of the American Southwest, Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, and California, to again become part of Mexico, to secede from the Union. And we're going to see this pattern repeated with almost all of these groups that we're going to have a look at in this section. That there's kind of a moderate view, and there is then also kind of a radical extreme view. And Hispanic Americans are no different. But in 2013, they formed the largest minority group in the United States by far. Their economic, political, and social power is growing, and the United States is going to be a very different place in 2050 than it was, in 1950, largely because of this massive influx of Hispanics.